Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Great. My name is Engineer Simon Ngure, and I'm very, very, very grateful to be here today. I can see some people whose faces are familiar. This is familiar space, and I'm really very thankful for you to have come. I can assure you, you're not wasting your time, neither are you wasting your money. I think we were told that the two issues are in accounting today. I work for KenGen on a regular daily basis. That's a Kenya electricity generating company. And so today, even in my opening talk, we're going to have a bit of a conversation about what's happening in the energy space, especially electricity. But before I go into that, I want to acknowledge those who are here together with us, the President of the South African Energy Efficiency Confederation, Lisa. Welcome to Kenya. Let's give her a round of applause. We also have together with us the head of the Energy Training Foundation, Yolanda, from South Africa. Let's say welcome her into Kenya and into the house. And together with her, Sumaya, the head of business development of ENTF, of energy, the training foundation, South Africa Energy Training Foundation. By the way, did you know that I was trained by your organization? We probably hadn't talked about that, Yolanda. I took training from Professor Grobler when I was a young man, and that was many years ago, 2001 to be precise. And it was the first training in Kenya, and it was done by South Africa. I think I got registered as a CM in 2002. I was in the first class. The first class was only 8 people. So Kenya has a history. I think no wonder I'm the president. What do you think? And since then, many, many more professionals have come on board, and we visit training. Let me just put a few comments to this. And by the way, before I go on, do we have any other nations represented here? Yes? Uganda, of course. Yes. Wonderful. South Africa, Uganda. Any other country? Yes?
Sweden.
Sweden? Wow. Let's give Sweden a welcome. Wonderful. Are you both from Sweden?
Yes.
Great. I took my wind energy training in Sweden. So
whereabouts in Sweden?
I was both. I was in a number of cities, but mostly in the University of no, little island up in the north.
There's a lot of weird names.
Yes, I don't remember that, and that was many years ago as well. Yeah, so don't let my face fool you. Korea's. Any other country? Wonderful. Now, we were expecting the Minister of Energy. I don't know whether Engineer Kiva has arrived. Not yet? Okay. Wonderful. Let's go on. One of the things that's very momentous for me that I've learned over the years is that we have two specific resources that drive mostly what happens in the world. And when I learned these about 15 years ago, I was a little shocked. Most of the wars of the countries of the world, they are about two resources. Most of them are about energy. It's the most important thing. It drives actual human behavior on a very large scale. And to a smaller extent, the other one is water. In Kenya, we usually have strife between different tribes. And what do they usually fight for? Mostly it's water and pasture, for those who are pastoralists. And pasture is part of energy. It's actually cattle feed. It's biomass. If you look at what's happening in the world and in the recent years, you will see that most of the battles that have been fought, say in the South, in the Middle East, they've been about energy. And as people become more energy efficient, more energy independent, the likelihood of wars goes down. And what then takes effect next is that people begin to get concerned about security. And that's a second subject that we probably will not be talking about today. If you look at the world economies, and you plot the nation's GDP against the energy consumption, especially modern energy and especially electricity, you will notice that most of the countries of the world lie in a straight line. And that's because the level at which a country industrializes is very closely linked to its GDP growth, and that's very closely linked to how much they have developed their modern energy use, and especially electricity. Now, that also, of course, has other connections with other infrastructure, like roads, rail, and all other forms of maybe infrastructure, transport systems, and communication systems as well. And therefore, the energy space is a very hot debate. About 10 years ago, I was in the ministers' conference in Ethiopia discussing development of Africa. And when I put up that chart of the board, we had about 80 ministers in attendance across Africa, and we had a few finance ministers. And I made a comment that got me into trouble, but that later earned me quite some handshakes from the ministers. I said, never be cheated that the Minister of Energy drives the agenda of development in the country. It's the Minister of Energy that actually drives the development agenda, because if the amount of energy you have determines economic growth, then that's the person that drives what happens. In Kenya, that would be my CS, Honorable Ketem, and if there were things that were not to go right in this country, we would put it right at his doorstep. We shouldn't even be talking to the president. The president may set the administrative agenda, but what actually happens in the country is driven by what happens in the energy space. Availability of energy is one of the key factors, key parameters. And in Kenya, what we have done is to make energy more abundantly available than we're using now, because there are only two world models. The first one is where energy is made available first, and then that drives investment, that drives development. And in other places, it's where then the development is going on ahead of energy availability. And there are only two countries in the world that are doing that. It's only India and Pakistan. All the other countries of the world, its energy is available first, and then that drives investment, industrial growth, and that drives most of the time the economic development. And in Kenya, we're doing that. If you maybe do not know, our installed capacity in electricity is just coming up to 2.7 gigawatts, when that includes the new wind plant that's being commissioned. South Africa is at about 45. And if you looked at those two numbers and you plotted the GDP, both countries are on the same trajectory. So South Africa went way ahead of Kenya in industrialization, and Kenya is coming up behind it. But then what that means is that South Africa is more heavily industrialized. And that is why it's good to have friends like Yolanda, because we possibly could be able to invite some of those investments into Kenya. And the conversations that are happening, I attended a couple earlier this year in South Africa, is how can Africa more effectively? Do we need to re-innovate? Do we need to reinvent the wheels of certain industrial capacities that are in the African continent? Or do we just share what we have more effectively? And that is another subject that I think that has very close links with security, which is international trade, and we will not go into that today. In my area life, I actually I worked on projects. My original training is as a drilling engineer, so I spent many years, my first 15 years of work, I was a drilling engineer, and I drilled geothermal wells. And then I graduated into building power stations. I built a couple in Okari. And along the way I learned that efficiency in power stations is a very big motivation towards how effective or how cost effective the electricity is. Today in Kenyan, we supply about 60-65% of the capacity, but we also give 75% of the electrons. What that means is that it's cheaper to operate our plants, and so we dispatch them more than the plants of our competitors. What does that mean? Literally, it means that electricity from Kenya is cheaper. We hold the heritage assets, the older plants, and the debts are paid off and all that, so that comes into the mix. But essentially, access is not the only concern. The cost of electricity is a huge concern. And therefore, that's where the nexus comes in, that if we do not interconnect with, say, Ethiopia, who are able to generate hydropower at 4 cents, and we are still developing our resources in Kenya at 12 to 22 cents of the remaining hydro resources. We are not actually doing that well. And this is where development usually happens in large geographical areas. If you look at South Africa, if it wasn't that big, they possibly wouldn't have achieved what they have. If you look at, for example, the United States, they do development on a very large scale. In the African countries, we have to come together and do development in partnerships. So the Eastern Africa Power Pool is going to help move electrons from Ethiopia down towards the south, and later on when we do the other big dams like the Ngure Dam, then the electrons will also be able to come up towards the east and also towards the north. So energy is going to be a big debate. It's going to drive what happens. It's going to be part of the conversations that are international within the Eastern Africa context. You probably have been seeing photographs that we are now working with the government of Djibouti. Just last week, there was a conference there. The chief guest was the Kenyan minister. Our CEO was making the keynote address, a 2-day conference attended by the president of Djibouti. We will be moving in there within not too long to go and begin to drill wells for geothermal energy in Djibouti. And so energy is going to drive who talks to who. In the Eastern Africa region, some of the very heavy conversations that have actually led us to the desire to have an Eastern Africa government has been around energy. In 2001, 2002, I was the lead member of a team that worked within the 3 countries, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, to look for where we would be able to get our best and cheapest energy resources. Unfortunately, because we were not able to find very good resources, we had to spread our wings, and so we went into Ethiopia. And when we looked at the resources in Ethiopia, we finally decided Ethiopia was the best country to partner with. And so that's where the Ethiopian interconnector with Kenya started. That conversation began from that place. We've had conversations about connecting to the South African power pool through Zambia. And because of that reason, I spent quite a bit of time in Zambia and going through the Tanzanian connections there to bring that electricity up. In the end, what I'm saying here is that the energy resources and how they flow is going to determine, most of the times, how the nations will actually finally relate. If we can share electricity, then we can also probably share manufacturing capacity, then possibly we can be able to go ahead and share our economic and political interests. So if you look at some of the conversations that has happened in the past, I don't know whether you know this, we had some kind of a conversation going on in East Africa. Kenya has oil, Uganda has oil, and so the first conversation was, why don't we build a pipeline between Uganda through Kenya to the port so that we can export the oil together? And that conversation finally was, how can we build a refinery for this region, and where should that be? So we said, okay, let the pipeline come through Kenya, let the refinery be in Uganda. And you understand the conversations that, the political maneuvering that happened when the pipeline changed direction. So Maya here is smiling, yeah? Because Uganda somehow had a conversation with Tanzania that was slightly different. And they said, oh, now the pipeline will go through Tanzania. And what happened? Relationships shifted, okay? You understand what I'm talking about. So how energy flows determines relationships. Saudi Arabia has been a friend of the United States, and there is a very interesting energy versus political interest conversation going on right now between the Crown Prince and Donald Trump, yeah, around a name called Khashoggi. This man died. He is a United States resident. I understand he's a resident of the United States. And therefore, there is a conversation as to whether did you actually kill him or did you not? And that conversation is now around interests. Around interest. And those interests were founded on what? Energy. So I'll stop that conversation there and come a little further down. In Kenya, electricity, energy use is divided into three main buckets. 69% of our energy use is biomass, 22% is petroleum, and electricity is at 9%. If I was to invest, I would not be investing in electricity. Okay? And I want you to take that with a pinch of salt because I work for the electricity generation company. I would be investing where the president is investing, in planting trees. Planting trees. In March in South Africa, I sat in one of the conversation panels, and you know the way that the panelists sit aside and they have a conversation, and one person said, 1,700 megawatts of electricity in Kenya cannot support 5% GDP growth in Kenya. Where is all the rest of the energy coming from? I'll tell you maybe a sneak preview. Part of it is coming from the way that we have set up our industries. We have factories in the middle of Nairobi that are burning wood for energy. They're using wood pellets. They're using, our tea industry uses tree logs to fire their boilers. And so it's not, if you look at how much modern energy we're using in terms of petroleum, electricity, it looks like it's a little. But if you look at our GDP level, we're just cutting down more trees. Okay? So within Kenya, we have an initiative to green the country, but that aside, we cannot keep doing that. And that is why possibly I'm in electricity. And so the bigger campaign is, can we install more electricity? Can we make that more available? Can we make that more accessible? Can we make that cheaper? And that is why I think a couple of weeks ago, we had an ultimatum from the president to lower the cost of electricity. Did you see that? What are we trying to do? We realize that the Big Four agenda will not fly. Affordable housing and all these things will not work until finally we fix electricity availability, access, and cost. We've got to fix that. Now, some of the issues that come into the cost of electricity is how efficiently it's being used. And let's begin from the power stations. I built a couple of power stations, and at that time we expected that the power stations would be used at about 94% every year. 94%. 94% from a geothermal plant is heavy electron consumption, production. But then we go into a problem in that the Kenyan economy doesn't work at night. So the peak load will hit 1,700 megawatts in the evenings, and then it drops to a base load at night of about 600 to 700 megawatts. Now what that means is 1,000 megawatts switches off between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning. During that time, the 600 megawatts has to pay, or 700 megawatts has to pay for 1,700 megawatts. Because you still have to pay for all that installed capacity. You have to pay for those power stations. And so, what we're trying to do is to ensure that we grow towards a 24-hour economy, and so we're making electricity cheaper in that season of the night, because it's better to have that being used at another 300 megawatts, because everything else is paid for, and only pay operational costs for generation of that, utilization of that 300 megawatts. If we were to do that only, electricity costs in Kenya would come down by a huge amount. I don't want to go into numbers because consumption of an extra 1,000 megawatts at night is probably not a mean feat. But it's something that is in the space. And that happens when you go into value addition, you go into some of the SME space that we are talking about. And the president was tackling that very effectively a couple of weeks ago at Strathmore University. So it is not one thing, But it's that we've got to go into cost efficiency that goes into the type of plants that we install, that goes into when we use electricity, that goes into the cost of electricity, goes into the amounts that we use and what we use it for. Industrialization, which is a key agenda of the Big Four, has got to target electricity. Anything else we do past the standard gauge rail has to be designed for use of electricity. Okay. And now we're talking about electrifying the standard gauge rail. Okay. Because we have now enough electricity to do that. So when you look at the agenda of energy use, efficiency then of not only investment and use of resources, but efficiency of how actually you use that in the demand side, in homes, in industry, becomes very key in the cost of electricity. Cost of electricity. Because the cost of electricity drives availability. A few months back, in July, we were having conversations about the cost of electricity. We were having a tariff review. And we noted that we generate 11,000 gigawatt hours. We generate 11,000 gigawatt hours every year. We sell and use effectively 8,000 gigawatt hours. From there, you can calculate how much we are not actually using effectively. Some of that is connected to homes. We've got about 1 million homes which use electricity in Kenya intermittently. The reason being affordability. At one point they are connected, at another point they are not connected. And it's easier now because it's tokens, so you do not see Kenya Power staff coming to disconnect the meter. You just feed your tokens and you use the electricity. But what happens when you run out of money? The house just goes dark and you're no longer putting in the tokens because you can't afford it. And that is why affordability is a huge thing. When we therefore had that conversation, and you probably can download that from the ERC website, the Energy Regulatory Commission website, we said up to 10 kilowatt hours would have a low cost. It would be the lifeline tariff. It would be support of the customers that are in the bottom of the pyramid. But if you look at what the president is saying, he's saying take that up to 100, not 10, 100 kilowatt hours. What is he trying to do? He's trying to bring in a number of people who can participate in the economic development into that bracket so that the economy can grow. So you begin to see the connection between the costs, affordability, and economic growth. If you do not get enough people into that access bracket, you will not have economic growth. Okay. Now, why is it important therefore for even a home that has got 2 bulbs to have cheaper bulbs to run than to have the old type of incandescent bulbs, which were more expensive? Again, affordability. Affordability. Can that person afford to pay maybe 30 units instead of 10? And that is where this conversation becomes very, very central. We actually hold the solution to the affordability of electricity in a growing economy. Because if you do not bring in efficiency at the very original thought, as you do installation of the power stations, as you do the design of the power lines, as you look at how people economically relate and work, if you do not go into the conversation of how are you going to make that electricity available to that person, and then you begin to expose that person to what else they can use with electricity, and then they begin to get involved in the economic agenda and growth of and development of the country, then you will never get the gigawatt, the 45 gigawatt hours of gigawatts of installed capacity and consumption, and therefore you'll never get to high GDPs. That is why it's so important that we in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, the Eastern Africa countries are finding our footing in that space. In that space. I can see the light that today is shining on me. All those are LEDs. Is that right? Is that right? Yes. This is an LED spotlight. 5 years ago, that would have been a different type of alarm in Kenya. So why is it that we got into that space? How much money he spends on electricity or in the business. That lamp doesn't burn as quickly as the incandescent or the other types of halogen bulbs. And so longevity, it lasts longer. And so he can use it longer. Although it does attenuate in terms of light and output, that's over a long period, over many hours of use. And that's just an example that we have here in the room. That if we were to think about what it is that we are even buying in terms of technology, we can do a lot in terms of our own use of electricity and the cost of that. And so I've outlined right from the level of production to use the importance of energy efficiency. What does it drive? Largely, it lowers cost. Number two, it makes the additional electrons that are not being used because they were saved available for others to use. And that's the space that we call virtual power stations. If you look at what happened in Kenya, our energy consumption is at about 4%. Year on year, between 4 and 5%. I think this year we may be at about 5%. The last 4 years, we've been at between 4 and 5%. The energy demand growth. What that means is, as we install more capacity, we're not using as many reactors. And it's because, as we now industrialize, we are going into spaces that are more energy efficient. More energy efficient. And so if you look at the Kenyan curve, you'll find that the GDP continues to grow at a steady rate of 5% plus. But if you look at electricity consumption, it's dipped to below that. And that's because of the impact of efficiency. In the last 5 years, we've saved, and I think you saw that in the celebrations that we had for energy efficiency, sponsored by Kenya Association of Manufacturing. Kenya Association of Manufacturers. We are saving year on year about 12 billion Kenya shillings out of energy efficiency. Now what that means is, because the whole sector is at about 70 billion Kenya shillings, what that means is the sector will be at about 82. The difference of 12 billion is savings that are actually going into slowing down installation of new power stations. That's actually a virtual power station, and that's lowering the cost of electricity in Kenya. And so that's how impactful you are. Let's do a quick calculation. Somebody get for me 12 divided by 70, because that's the impact of our footprint today. 12 gigawatt hours saved out of 12 billion Kenya shillings saved out of 70 billion. Or saved out of 82. I think it's 12 divided by 82. Does somebody have the number? What percentage is that? How much? 14.6. So 15% of the savings in the energy sector is coming from the efforts that are being driven from what we're doing in this, what we're discussing about in this room today. Do we have more space? Yes. I have a report that I have worked with a friend, a colleague of mine within the association, which shows that we have space of another 5% within just this year alone. Now, somebody divide for me 5% of 82 billion, because that's the amount of money you can make. It's coming closer home, isn't it? How much is that? 5% of 82?
4.1.
4.1. Okay, 4.1 billion is the opportunity that we have in energy savings this year of 2018-2019. And the only people who have access to that is not generation companies like us. It's the private industry, private sector, investing in energy efficiency measures. Interesting story. Ordinarily, I would not speak about this if I was speaking in a Kenyan event. So tomorrow morning when we go to unveil our results, because most likely it will be tomorrow, hopefully, I will not talk about this, okay? But remember, you had it, okay? And so because I sit on both sides of the fence, one side I want more electricity to be used, but on the other side I'm also the president of a chapter that wants electricity to be saved. Be careful how you report me. This is a very important space. We're therefore looking at how do we keep helping government to drive the right policy. I've had 2 people in my division involved in the conversation of the energy policy for the last 5 years. We finance that because it's that important. The 24-hour economy is part of the mix. We're ensuring that we get energy-saving motors, high-efficiency motors, in all the equipment that's imported in this country is a big agenda. Partnerships with South Africa in production of solar water heating equipment is a conversation that's been going on the last 3 years. And hopefully we'll be able to get that manufacturing capacity to have a footprint here. So that we are not just importing, we're also manufacturing. Because around the process, the idea is that you also want our economy to create jobs. And you want the country's resources also to be used, because we have some resources that can go into that manufacturing process. That when we import, it doesn't get used in the country. And so we have all of those initiatives possibly more available to the private sector, because the government normally does not install the manufacturing facilities, except if you're in China, where government companies actually sometimes do that. But in developing economies like Kenya, it's actually the private sector that does that. So as you go to think about what is it that you're going to possibly use electricity for, because I'm encouraging you to actually go out there and think about what you will use it for. Don't just think chicken farming. Think manufacturing of solar panels, either for water heating or for electricity production. Those kind of things that will help move us to the next level. Let me finally, as I close, speak about the frontier investment areas in Kenya. This is the reason I'm doing this is because it's something that we have to think about as the Eastern Africa region. And this is where how we get into giving access in every single country that landscape has changed tremendously. 10 years ago, most of that space was only available in small hydro stations, the mini hydros. In Tanzania, we had 18 installed in 1 year in the remote areas of that country. We had quite a number done in Uganda. We had quite a number initiated in Kenya. Some of them are serving well now in the tea industry. And we got involved in those efforts. Because at that time, KenGen was helping incubate some of these ideas and also bridge the gap between when the grid gets to a specific area and also what's happening in that area. Because we do not want to curtail variation in, say, production of tea, and at the same time, we do not possibly have enough consumption there to warrant taking huge power infrastructure there. And so we got involved in some of those, and I think there is a study that has all the resources of Kenya mapped. But then something has changed within those 10 years, and the solar power has become so competitive that you can actually be able to put solar power in a house, and you can actually use it combined with, say, a diesel generator in a mini grid to serve a little town. And that is why you're seeing the changes that are happening now. We're beginning to do larger solar panel installations in different parts of the country, where we have lengthy power lines, like for example, Garissa. We used to operate a 5 megawatt station in Garissa. We took the power line there because it became a little more cost effective to take the power line to Garissa. But then because the power line is so long, the voltages are suffering. So during the day when electricity consumption is a bit much, we are having a few issues. So what have we done? The Rural Electrification Authority is now commissioning a 40 megawatt solar plant to support electricity generation during the day. Okay? We're having conversations now on how to operate it, but it's in the commissioning phase. We're doing others in Western Kenya where we're suffering similar issues. So solar has become very competitive. And it's one of the areas where you can go all the way from a solar torch to a light in a house, to an installation that includes running a fridge and running a television set and computers, to where you can have a little tower, to where you can have grid-connected power. Solar has actually revolutionized the way, therefore, that you give access to those people who are at the bottom of the pyramid or are too far from the electricity infrastructure. In Kenya, we have recently connected a total of 5,700 schools to electricity using solar. Most of that was done by some of the people who were in this room, because we were able to buy the installations and put them in those schools. And because of that, we can possibly be able to introduce our children to laptops and other mind-changing and mind-forming technologies, and also access to information while they are younger. And that, of course, within another 15 years, we will see that begin to feed back into the economy. So solar is a space that you probably should think about. It's my estimate that Kenya is using much more solar electricity from panels and from other kinds of investments faster than possibly we are doing in any other form of electricity within the last 4 years. That's changing dramatically. And that's an area you can begin. So don't think that you do not have a space to begin. You have places that you can begin. Before then, we come and begin to talk about the new little hydros that are being created. I saw an interesting innovation where we've got a little, it's just a little turbine, which is in a pipe, amazingly, and 2 tanks. And this farmer is actually using solar power to pump water up into the tanks during the day when the sun is shining. And in the night, he's got a little turbine in the pipe that's actually generating electricity by just dropping the water back into an underground reservoir, and he's using that at night. Interesting innovation. So during the day he has solar power, and during the night he has hydropower. He actually has what we call pumped storage solution, and it's in his farm. So we're beginning to see innovations coming from people who are thinking from the angle of energy access and efficiency, and that's being developed by people like you. I've probably excited you enough for you to be here for the next 2 days, and I don't want to give you too much, but also notice that as a business, we're not only doing well, but we're hoping to do better, because we're still innovating. KenGen has an innovation engine that does a seminar every year. In the earlier years, when I was in charge of innovation, we started doing things like multi-part well drilling. If you go to Olkaria now, you'll see 3-4 wells on one part. And we discovered that when you drill a well from the top, and then you take it down directionally, then you can, instead of doing pipelines on surface, you can do the pipeline as part of the well. And therefore that lowers the cost of investment. And so we're still doing innovations. I want to encourage you to do innovation wherever you are. Look for ways of reducing the consumption of electricity where you are. Help us keep building that virtual power plant. And for you, what that means is it comes back in immediate chemistry. Your meter doesn't tick as much, and therefore you save electricity and you save money. And hopefully, you make your manufacturing facility much, much more competitive. And therefore, we can buy your products cheaper. Remember to pass that money back to the customer, okay? So that you do not just mill the unga and the cost keeps going up, where we are making electricity cheaper for you in the night. We want to keep working together with you, and ideas you have, give to us at the association. If you need help, you need facilitation, please talk to us. If you have an idea that needs government sponsorship, talk to us. because we have linkages at the Ministry of Energy and every other place. And we can be able to facilitate you. You want to import something from South Africa, please talk to me. I can talk to Yolanda, and she has connections. You want to take a power line into Uganda, please talk to me. I'll talk to Somaya, and she can probably help us. Yeah? So let's think beyond where we are. In the first class, the people that we graduated, 5 of them are still working outside this country, helping with energy efficiency measures in other countries. We started off in Uganda. One of my colleagues has been working in Uganda for many years, installing solar power, solar lamps in the streets and all kinds of other places. So don't be limited in one place. As I travel the roads in Kenya at night, I see they do not have solar panels and they do not have electricity. Possibly there is a lot that we can do. So don't be limited in terms of your thinking capacity. We can be able to do a lot, especially with solar solutions within the space that we have even now. But today, take this home. We have 4.1 billion Kenya shillings that's available for you to make starting now. I want to stop there. Thank you very much for coming, and please stay with us the next couple of days.